portion be with the beasts and the grass of the earth. So the tree is going to be cut down but not destroyed. In verse 16, let his heart be changed. Now we go from a vision of a tree, and now we're talking about a man. And brethren, that's just how the Bible does it. It's language. We do the same thing when we're using a metaphor. The tree is a metaphor. It is a type of, it is Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel's going to tell him as much. He says, let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. In apocalyptic literature, you can just about write it down. Numbers don't mean what they say. They're used for, usually in the book of Revelations, for instance, 7 just means completeness. The world was created how long? How long did it take to create the earth? 7 days, you know. That's just the number they use for completeness. And I believe that's what you have here. Some people say, well, the Chaldeans, they measured time in half years, so this is 3.5 years. Well, and some say, well, no, the Jews measured it in years, and so it's 7 years. We don't know. But we know 7 times, and I believe it's more of a complete thing. Till he gets the lesson, if you will. Let 7 times pass over. In verse 17, this matter is by decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know. There's another, verse 17, verse 32, your thesis of the book. To the intent that the living may know, that's us, that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. God is in control, and he raises up kingdoms, but he also has the power and does bring them down. And we must remember that even as his children, as we see all the interesting things that are taking place in our world today, from Europe to our world and all the morals that seem to be changing. We went last night, we went out to see a movie. It's with my grandson. It's his birthday. You know, we went to see one of those monsters things. And so, you know, you get a bunch of previews in the beginning, and they all have them for little kids. It's little kid previews. And I tell you, the little kid preview, it's an English movie, drawing, but it said, you know, sometimes families are different. This is the first thing, you know, we just sit down. Sometimes families are different. Sometimes there's a mommy with a little kid, and then sometimes there's no mommy, so you just have the little baby by itself. Then sometimes there's a mommy, and a daddy. You know, and I'm going, I can't believe this. You know, here I am being fed propaganda at a movie theater for little kids where they're just trying to say, hey, sometimes families are 2 daddies. Sometimes families are 2 mommies. And listen, that's just not the way that the God of heaven would have it to be. And all that is just trying to desynthesize us as a people to that. And I, for one, don't appreciate it, and I know that you don't as well. But, brethren, we have to speak up. We have to speak out and let us know and let folks know that we don't appreciate that that's not right, and that's not how the family is to be. Is that sometimes the case? Yes, but it's not what you want. It's not what the Lord would have us to be. It's not something you want to promote, especially in a movie theater with a bunch of little children. Well, notice, the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basis of men. It helps to remember God's in control. And if this nation continues to go in the path that it is, and it looks as though that's the way it's going to go, and maybe even snowball, that God is going to take care of it. Just as sure as we're all sitting here tonight, God will take care of it. He took care of the Chaldeans. He took care of the Medo-Persians. He took care of his own people when they would not obey him. Rest assured, God will take care of a wicked nation. And brethren, that's just the way it is. So we should be able to find comfort in that, though. And what do you mean comfort? You know, you're talking about, listen, God is going to take care of his people. We see what happens in this Persian kingdom a few years down the road with Esther, as we're studying on Sunday morning. God's taking care of them. There's been a decree that all of his people are going to be wiped out, but guess what? It's going to work out for the better. God's going to take care of his people. His folks were in captivity in Jerusalem, in Babylonia, but what happened? God took care of them. He brought them back, that remnant, that faithful remnant, he brought back, reestablished them. Now, that wasn't easy. And folks went through a whole lot of hardship. And yes, it would be so much easier in our country if things would turn back around, then the morality would improve. And then, you know, God would bless this nation and continue to bless us. And we would grow better instead of growing worse. But as Christians, we can rest assured the fact God's going to take care of his people. That doesn't mean we won't have to go through some of the things that will take place, though, as the children of Israel had to do as well. Verse 18, This dream this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of the kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able. For the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. And I appreciate how the King James doesn't capitalize that. He's not talking about God. He's talking about just pagans, just, gods. That's what makes you go, Daniel, you have all the gods in you. Doesn't have that understanding. Then verse 19. Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, who astonished for 1 hour, was astonished. We would say astonished. And his thoughts troubled him. And the king spake and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belteshazzar answered and said, My Lord, the dream to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to mine enemies. I've got a different translation here I wanted to share with you. The New American Standard Bible has this, and I believe it's the meaning. Get a little bit clearer. My Lord, if only the dream applied to those who hate you, and its interpretation to your adversaries. The NIV translates it, My Lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies, and its meaning to your adversaries. And I believe that's what he's saying there. It's a terrible thing that's going to happen. And Daniel has a relationship with the king, and he realizes, just like with any king, there's people wanting to depose him. And he's like, if this was just to them. One of the things that I think that we're going to see that's kind of interesting is that Nebuchadnezzar is going to hold on to his kingdom, however long that takes. But I think there's a reason behind that. When in a kingdom, even when the king gets sick or something, what do all the people close to him don't want anybody to know? Well, that the king is sick. Why? Because people will use that. They'll try to take away the throne. There's upheaval. People will attack. Other kingdoms will come in and try to destroy because they know there's a weakness now. There's a flaw. And I believe that may be the very reason that Nebuchadnezzar is able, of course, God said so, obviously. But I believe that his people probably just didn't let anybody know what he's going through. Notice verse 20. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached into heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king. Thou art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, Hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the tree, even with a band of iron and brass and the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my lord the king, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of man, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. There again in this chapter, that's the thesis, that's the theme of this chapter. God is in control. This is a condition that we even have today. You can look it up in your medical dictionary. It's called boanthropy. And it's a noun. It's a form of madness in which the victim imagines himself to be an ox. It doesn't stop there. If you'll just go down the list there are different things where people think they're different kinds of animals. Some people will think themselves a dog. Some people will think themselves a chicken. And the bad thing about it, every one of those has a different technical name. So, I guess bow being from a bovine, boanthropy. But, and that happens even to this day. Some people will think that they're a particular animal, and they will take on the traits of that animal, even wanting to get out of the house and go run with those animals. And so, when I was reading that, I was thinking about probably where the werewolf thing came from, Some dude was sick and thought he was a werewolf and wanted to go out there and run with him and stuff. And so you have these, stories made up and things of that nature, but it's actually a medical condition that's observable in mental patients even to this day. Well, that's what takes place with Nebuchadnezzar. Notice, and whereas they commanded thee to leave the stump of the roots, thy kingdoms will be sure unto thee, after that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. There's your thesis again. Heaven is in control. It's not you, Nebuchadnezzar. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be accepted unto thee. Daniel says, listen to me. I can help you out here. Break off thy sins by righteousness. In other words, repent. Don't do the things that you've been doing. Do what you ought to do, and thine iniquities by showing, notice, mercy to the poor. I know we talk a lot about poor in this country and how the poor people need to be taken care of and that the poor are having it tough and this and that. Folks, in Nebuchadnezzar's day and age, poor meant poor. It didn't mean like I only have one iPod and it's only 12 gig. You know, I need one that's at least got 250 gigs so I can get all my cool tunes on it. That's not poor. These people had nothing. They would be born with nothing. They would have nothing, and they would literally be starved to death. And the people that had money, people in power, they didn't care anything about them. That's just simply the situation. We live in a nation where poverty, our poverty level, you're making pretty good money, and our nation, well, that's not enough. Poverty today is if you only have a couple of changes of clothes and your car is over 20 years old or 15 years old. It's a big difference. Poor back then, and Daniel's telling him, change, repent, take care of the poor. In other words, have concern for people. Don't let them starve to death. Don't let them be cold at night because they don't have anything to put over their bodies. Take care of them. He says, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. In other words, turn, don't do what you're doing. So great advice, but, all this came upon the king, Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, now notice this didn't happen immediately. It's a year later. And I'd imagine, Nebuchadnezzar's probably thinking, well, ain't nothing happened. It must not have been as bad as, Daniel went on about it. So I seem to be doing pretty good. It's been a year. He maybe even forgot that he had the dream. Said he walked in the palace in the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, is this not great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? In other words, look what I have done. Remember we talked about Proverbs 16:18 being a good one sentence or one verse statement of this entire chapter. Very prideful. While the word was still in the king's mouth, he hadn't even got it out yet. There fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. That's stated 4 times in this chapter. You get an impression that the writer is really trying to drive that home. If you don't get anything else out of this chapter, remember that. God is in control. The same hour the thing was fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. This is kind of interesting. I was reading what several fellows wrote about this. I just thought that this is probably just something that took some time. I don't know how long the 7 times, but it's going to get this message across Nebuchadnezzar. So I just figured, his hair started growing at that point, and his teeth, and not brushing his teeth, things of that nature, and your nails, if you don't keep them trimmed down, they're just going to get longer. But I was reading one fellow says he believes this might have even been miraculous. That instantaneous, his hair was long, his nails were long, and he was hardly, recognizable. Maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. But, that would get your attention more. It says, and he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. Have you ever seen people that really keep their fingernails real long? I've seen that before, and I know there's some people that they must really mean to do that because, if mine get so long, they seem to break off. But some people have really, really long nails. I even saw one guy in a Guinness World Book of Records. You ever seen that? And they all grow out and they're curled and everything. It's amazing. Well, your fingernails, they'll get rough. They can be strong and claw-like. I've known some guys. I've had a fella run his thumb in me one time. It was so sharp. But imagine never taking care of yourself and acting like an animal. That's what's taking place here. At the end of the days, notice, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. And I blessed the Most High. And notice his attitude. It's totally changed, wouldn't it? If you find out, you wake up and you're laying in the field and, you find out you've been eating grass and that you've been months or years in a condition where you've been running around like an animal, don't you think that would? Yes. And I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, what doest thou? In other words, when God decides to strike, you are not going to block his hand. You are not going to stop his hand. I remember one time when I was, as a young boy grows up, we talked a little bit about discipline this morning, and my mother and father, their form of discipline, they were belt people. I didn't know what a blessing that was till my granny got a hold of me one time with a switch. And then from then on, belt's cool. You can use mine. Here, let me give you mine. But anyway, that's how I was disciplined back in the day. And I'll never forget the first time that I actually caught the belt. You ever done that? When your parents were spanking you, and you grabbed hold of the belt? That's not a good idea. That just frees up their hands, But anyway, I did that. This is the idea here. Daniel's saying, you're not going to be able to grab his hand. When the Lord decides to strike, you're not going to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing here? Let's talk about this for a minute. No, you're not going to be able to stay his hand. And you're not going to be asking him, what are you doing? What doest thou? You remember that's what Job was saying. Boy, I just like to get an audience with God, because I've lost my family, I've lost everything I have, and, I just want to talk to him. And I want to say, what have I done? What have I done to deserve this, perhaps? I want to be able to ask God. I want to be able to talk to God. And you remember what happened when God appeared to him and said, okay, Job, here I am, big boy. Pull up your garments, gird yourself like a man. Here I am. What do you want to say? Now, and you remember Job immediately like, Lord, I'm of unclean. I'm sorry. I'm in no place to talk to you. That's what Nebuchadnezzar's saying here. You're not going to stay his hand. You're not going to ask him what he's doing and try to correct him. Notice verse 36. At the same time, my reason returned unto me, and the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and my brightness returned unto me, and my counselors and my Lord sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Last verse. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the kingdom of heaven, all whose works are true, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. What a lesson. The greatest king that the four kingdoms that we're going to see, and this puts him on the totem pole with Alexander the Great. He's going to be there with Julius Caesar. All these kings that we can think about, God says that Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, and there'll never be a kingdom like unto his. So Alexander the Great, sorry, you're not as great as Nebuchadnezzar was. Julius Caesar, sorry, you're not as great as Nebuchadnezzar was. And Nebuchadnezzar looks back at this and says, I learned a lesson there. I learned a lesson. And brethren, when I think about what he's gone through, and I think about some of the things I've gone through, and probably you can think this as well, wouldn't it be so much better if from time to time we would step back for a moment and really think about what we're going through and really see who God is and that God is in charge and that God is able to do so much. He can help us and just step back and say, who am I? Why am I griping about this situation? This is what it is. God's going to take care of me. He's promised he's going to take me through any of these situations. Why? I guess what I'm trying to say is, why does it take some major event in our lives to push us to our knees, a lot of times to get back to that kind of relationship that we ought to have all the time? And the Lord, he has a way of humbling us. So I think a lesson that we can learn from here is from time to time, I need to step back and take an inventory of myself and my life and say, am I prioritizing correctly? Am I putting God first and foremost in my life, with my wife, with my family? Brethren, Brother Campbell said something out at camp that I know about every one of us in this room could say. And that is that, we're supposed to be long-suffering. And where are we the least long-suffering? Usually in our homes, with the very people that we love the most, with our spouses, with our children. And these type of things, you don't know how much you appreciate them. You don't know how much you'd miss them until that situation arises, and then sometimes it's too late. Let's don't be like Nebuchadnezzar. Let's don't be driven out to eating grass and sleeping in the dew of the heavens to realize that there's a God in heaven. He's in control of everything. Let's realize that now and humbly walk with our God. To do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God, and not have to learn such a difficult reason or lesson through such a difficult procedure. The point of the chapter in the book, we read it 4 times. It's a synopsis there in chapter 30, in verse 32, the last part of it. The Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men and giveth it to whomsoever he will. We can help you in any way. We encourage you to come as together we stand and while we sing.